Good afternoon, Mr. SR Nathan, 6th President of the Republic of Singapore, former NUS Chancellor, and eminent alumnus of the NUS Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, Professor Michael Sherraden, Brown School of Social Work, Washington University in St. Louis, Mr. Yatiman bin Yusof, Member, SR Nathan Professorship in Social Work Fundraising Committee, Vice President, Associate Professor Ho Kong Chong, NUS Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, Associate Professorial Fellow S. Vasu, Chairman of the Advisory Committee, Center for Social Development Asia, NUS, Mr. Enri, Associate Professorial Fellow, Social Work Department, Dr. Rosalind Au, Head of Department, Social Work, NUS. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Today is a special day. In a short while, we will have the inaugural public lecture by Professor Michael Sherraden, our newly appointed SR Nathan Professor. And gracing this occasion is the man who made this possible, and which the professorship is named after, the eminent Mr. Nathan. Mr. Nathan, on behalf of the department, we are truly grateful and so proud to have you as our alumni. In attendance today is a very diverse crowd. We are very grateful that here with us are colleagues from NUS as well as other institutes of higher learning, friends from government ministries, statutory boards, hospitals, the social service sector and the people sector too. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Irene. I'm a faculty member with the Department of Social Work, NUS, and today's facilitator. Our program is very simple. After this, there's welcoming remarks and then the public lecture. We'll have some time for Q&A, so please take this opportunity to ask Professor Sherraden the questions that you have, and then you're invited to a tea reception. So next, the welcoming remarks will be given by a man who probably needs no introduction, but for familiarity, I should do so. Dr. S. Vasu, Associate Professorial Fellow in the Department of Social Work and Chair of the Advisory Committee of the Center for Social Development Asia. Dr. Vasu, please.
Well, I'm not used to these computers and all that, but anyway, distinguished alumni, past immediate President of the Republic of Singapore, SR Nathan, our distinguished speaker, Professor Michael Sherraden, who is the first SR Nathan Professor invited, Vice Dean Professor Ho Kong Chong, the Faculty of Arts and Social Science, Rosalind Au, Head Department of Social Work, Mr. Yatiman, our roving ambassador from Kenya. So he's from Kenya, he's joined us, So let's give him a big hand. And Professor Bal Gopal, who is Emeritus Professor from University of Illinois. He's been here running some workshops for some of our graduates in social work practice, so we were fortunate to invite him here. Then the Vice Dean, who is, I already mentioned, Mr. Dean Tan Mao Tiong from UNISIM, who is here, Dean of Human Development and Social Services. Then we have Marcus Chu, who is the Associate Professor of the Department. Distinguished alumni, guests and donors for today's event, which we managed to raise tremendous amount of money. As you know that this professorship in social work under the name of our past immediate President, SR Nathan, is in recognition of his contribution to Singapore and to social work. So the professorship envisaged to allow us to invite scholars in social work as well as social services to come and provide ideas for our younger generation plus our older generation of social workers who need to be inspired with new thoughts and thinking. And it is timely that we are able and fortunate enough to be able to garner sufficient resources from the public and from well-wishers and others who support the social work cause to enable us to launch this. And we are indeed thankful to many of the donors, some of whom are here today, and many of you who have contributed in one way or the other to make this professorship available and for us to be able to launch this. It's a significant effort in being able to do this in the interest of social work and social development. And the whole idea is to provide research and inspiration to people in the field and to get them to think about how we can find new solutions to emerging complex problems in our society, as well as for the region, because we also have to look at the regional context, and we are trying to, under the Center for Social Development, to bring scholars and others to come and exchange and to be with us, to work with us, and to be able to contribute new ideas to social development. And this will be an ongoing thing, and the department will be inviting the likes of Professor Michael Sherraden, who is the first SR Nathan Professor of Social Work, been invited to come and share his thoughts with us on asset building. For SR Nathan, we like to recognize him for his colorful career. He's well known in Singapore, and many young people hopefully have gone through the many books he has published, and some of them are available. The Unexpected Journey, Why Am I Here? And his stories about, anecdotes and stories about his involvement in the social service sector and in public service. So he has written and documented many of the issues and life experiences there. And it's an interesting, they are all interesting publications, which provides his tremendous human experience in dealing with many issues that he has come across throughout his life. He started as a humble person, I must tell you. He started as a young person before the war, and in the General Admin Service. He worked as an interpreter and in the clerical service. He started there with very little. Families were impoverished. His father passed away when he was a very young person, and facing all this, he's able to get the grit and the gumption to be able to climb up and be one of the elected presidents of the Republic of Singapore. So, just to give a bit of his background for the younger generation of social workers and people here, about his background, we've read about it. I don't mind just refreshing you some aspects of it. Mr. Nathan has a colorful career. He started in medical social work as his first job in Singapore General Hospital. After that, then he went into the labour movement, worked as a staff officer in the Seamen's Welfare Board. As you know, the early days, Singapore being a seafaring society, there's a lot of seamen, they have a lot of problems. So he was there dealing with it. And we had our own local seamen too, who travel aboard, and they have various types of issues and problems to face. So he was there helping them with their family and other difficulties. And in his Why Am I Here, if you read, he has a very colorful anecdote there about working with the seamen, the issues of poverty, issues of problems that he's got to deal with, and people who are unemployed, and how they can help by him when he was working there. After working in the Seamen's Welfare Board, he then worked in NTUC, in the NTUC Research Unit, and was the director of the research unit in the labor unit. And following that, he went into civil service, became a permanent secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. As you know, with the globalized world, and we've got to deal with various countries and all that, you require somebody very astute in foreign affairs. And none other than his social work background and his training is able to navigate, negotiate, and establish a very full, powerful, and versatile Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And following foreign affairs, he has also got a stint in private service. He was in the Straits Times managing our newspaper. He was in Mitsubishi, Hitachi Mitsubishi, as one of the CEOs there, working in the shipping industry, which was just growing at that point in time. And following his private sector stint, he came back to be in civil service and managed back in foreign affairs to deal with various issues related to our growing nation. One of the most important things I think he has contributed, you have seen the recent TV episode, Singapore terrorism issues. He's one of the early persons confronted with terrorist activity. You name it today, everybody talks about terrorism. He was one of the early pioneers who had to be confronted to deal with real terrorists. And they were armed. And none other than that, Mr. Nathan, together with Mr. T. Tuaba, had to negotiate with the Japanese Red Army. They went to Bukom and they wanted to bomb Bukom and then capture hostages. And he himself exchanged. He became a hostage himself. He offered to be an hostage, to negotiate, and to be able to do that is tremendous guts and negotiation skills, which social work has contributed. If you read about it, social work skills and his capacity to be able to deal with conflict, managing and mediating, he was able to get the Japanese Red Army off Singapore. And that is a tremendous contribution to the early days. Otherwise, Singapore would have been in serious trouble because we were trying to encourage oil refinery and all that. And a blast in Shell Bukom would be tremendous loss to Singapore. So let's give him a big hand, for being able to do that. It is a tremendous feat that I can't even do. I'll be shivering all over, like many of you. And we'll be, what in Malay say, we'll be all gabra, dealing with these issues. But with his steady forthright in his capacity of human perspective, he's able to negotiate and do a good deed and do tremendous public service to Singapore. And after that, he then became the elected president of Singapore. He's the second elected president after Mr. Ong Teck Chong, second elected president, who has served the longest as an elected president. He served complete 12 years as Singapore's elected president and had done tremendous service to the community, social services with his training and all that. He was inspired, he inspired many volunteers and many voluntary groups to initiate new services in the context of Singapore. And one of the areas that he has championed is the President's Challenge today that raises at least $6 to $8 million for the various charities through the variety shows and to various fundraising functions. And he's contributed tremendously as a start, a pioneer in this area in terms of helping many voluntary agencies in the context of their service to the community. And last but not least, he still continues to be engaged up to today in many functions. If you call him, despite his tight schedule and his health and other related aspects, he still comes very gentlemanly and very sincerely and very approachable. He's a president, it's a people's president, and he lives to it, and he comes and attends many of our functions when invited to do so. So let's give him a big hand for his generosity and sincerity. Last but not least, let us stand and give him a standing ovation, because I'd like to tell you a secret that Mr. SR Nathan will be celebrating his 90th birthday on 3rd of July this year, coming. So let's stand and then give him a standing ovation. Thank you, Youngdahl. We wish him all the best and many good years to come. Thank you, SR. Thank you for coming. And we are indeed honored to have you today, today's occasion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rasu. And now it is my honor and privilege to introduce Professor Michael Sherraden. Professor Sherraden is the Benjamin E. Youngdahl Professor of Social Development in the Brown School of Social Work in Washington University in St. Louis. He is the founding director of the Center for Social Development. That's the center that the Social Work Department's Center for Social Development Asia is affiliated to. In 2010, Professor Sherraden was named among Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world. But perhaps what Professor Sherraden is most well known for is his work on assets building to help the poor, in particular matched savings programs. His work on assets has influenced policy development all over the world. And Professor Sherraden's public lecture today will be on this, assets building, so I shouldn't hold you up further. But I do want to add one thing. Professor Sherraden is a great person not just because of his accomplishments, but simply, I think he's a great person. I mean, most of you who are here, you probably saw the publicity flyer and you see this big grin on his face. Right? It tells a lot of personality. Indeed, for one so accomplished, he is very accessible and has been an advisor and support to many who owe their successors to him. And the NUS Social Department is one of his beneficiaries. He's been a long-time friend of the department. And so when this SR Nathan Professorship was established, I think no other person is more suited for this. So ladies and gentlemen, to deliver his public lecture titled Innovations in Assets Building, please join me to welcome SR Nathan Professor.
Thanks very much, Irene, Professor Ong. And thank you, Dr. Basu and President Nathan. It's a tremendous honor for me to be here today and accepting this professorship and have the opportunity to speak with you about some ideas, and hopefully we'll try to make that interesting. I prepared some PowerPoints here. I will run through them. I probably won't follow them exactly. I'm not quite sure how much time we have, so I'll get reined in at the right time here. Lily's going to give me a sign. So we'll leave some time for question and answer. I will try to talk about some work and some kind of big ideas, and then some very practical research and research results. So a little bit of mixture of content. I think so the title is Innovations in Asset Building. This topic is not new in Singapore. Singapore does more asset building and social policy than any other country, and this will all sound familiar to most people here. Let me start by saying that I do deeply appreciate the partnership with the Center for Social Development Asia, and Associate Professor Corinne Go is here, and And this is a partner organization for us. I direct the Center for Social Development at Washington University in St. Louis, and so we're very much partner organizations and have done, as you will see, have done several projects together, and will continue to do that. I would also like to, of course, acknowledge the President, Han-Tor Chuan, and the Dean of Arts and Sciences, Brenda Yo, and the Social Work Department head, Rosalind Au, who have helped make this possible. As Irene mentioned, I have many colleagues at NUS, and so I'm grateful to all of these folks for giving me this opportunity. I'd like to especially acknowledge the pioneers in the social work department. And there are many pioneers in Singapore and many in social work, but some of them end up being educators. And the ones that have influenced me most in the social work department over the years is Professor Vasu, Mrs. Ann Wee, who happens to be here today, and Dr. Myrna Blake, who's not able to be here. But these and other early social workers have made a tremendous contribution to your country and continue to make contribution to the social work department. I have many friends in the Singapore community who are not in the university, Sudha Nair and Connie Soin and others who also influenced me a lot and taught me a lot over the years. I can't say that how much I'm Dr. Vasu's really terrific remarks about President Nathan. He's a terrifically distinguished career as a social worker, and I would like to think in the broadest sense that President Nathan has remained a social worker for Singapore, that he really knows and has paid a lot of attention to what the people of Singapore need and how they can have stable lives and improve their lives over time. And he's been doing this work for more than half a century for the whole Singapore population. So it's really an honor for me. I can't possibly live up to this kind of career, but I will try to engage myself in this professorship in the spirit of President Nathan. And if I can do even 1/100th as much, I will feel very good about it. I would say about this professorship that this professorship can focus on social innovation. Singapore is very distinctive in terms of social policy and services. There's really no place that does things quite the same way. And in many ways, these policies in retirement and housing and healthcare, community development, the way race relations are handled and other areas are quite unique and quite distinctive, and in many ways quite successful. So in the spirit of thinking about Singapore as an innovative little country, and certainly in the area of social policy, you are innovative. That social innovation might be a good theme for this professorship. We will take in the modern era, we take this as a matter not of political statements or of values, but of research, and so we will look at innovations in terms of are they working or not, and what's the evidence about things are working, and actually this also very much in the spirit of Singapore. If things are not working, then it's quite typical to change them and try to do something that works a little better. Also, in terms of this professorship, I hope that we can think about introducing Singaporean social policy ideas into more audiences around the world. You already do that somewhat in the region, but it's not common to hear about Singaporean examples in discussions of social policy in much of the world, and not much known in many parts of the world, and actually quite a lot of misunderstanding about Singaporean policy in much of the world. You guys are better known for being harsh for people for chewing gum than for practically anything else. I mean, it's really quite limited set of understanding. So I think it's Singapore is a nation that is developed now, certainly highly developed in terms of people's well-being. It will more and more be in international discussions, and we will welcome an opportunity. Maybe we can use this professorship to engage Singapore a little bit more in the region, in discussions in the region, in policy discussions, and even outside the region. I'm hoping we can do something between the U.S. and this part of the world, and have some discussions that are quite interesting, where people can think and rethink about strategies for dealing with social issues that will face us in the 21st century. Finally, let me say a word about my home university. Washington University in St. Louis, my chancellor would not be happy with me if I did not say this, very highly committed to international relationships, and we have a McDonald Scholars Academy with partnerships with, I don't know, 20-some universities around the world. NUS is first among these. The NUS, very highly ranked university in the world, and we're honored to be a partner with NUS. So from my Chancellor, Mark Brighton, and our Vice Chancellor for International Affairs, Jim Wirtz, I'm here affirming the ties that we would like to continue to build between our two universities. And that extends beyond social work. Certainly we will build this tie in social work, but we're very interested in building ties with the entire university in every productive way that we can do. Okay, let me give you a little bit of my background because I think it matters here, and it also gives you some of the context about what things might be done. I came with my family to NUS as a Fulbright Research Fellow in 1992-93 to study the Central Provident Fund. I had published a book in 1991 called Assets and the Poor, which got some attention at that time in the George Bush Senior administration. I was working in that administration, and I'd heard about Singapore that had, the Central Provident Fund, but there's really very little knowledge out there. So I managed to, lucky enough to get a Fulbright Fellowship to come here, and we lived for a year in here, and Dr. Vasu helped us get settled. Dr. Vasu has helped so many people over the years. It'd be impossible to emphasize how many people he has hosted and provided friendship to and made visits productive in this process. So again, Dr. Vasu and Sudha Nair was working in the community. They were very instrumental in research on the Central Provident Fund. We did a random sample household survey. We learned a great deal. I'm deeply indebted to them for that process, and my whole family indebted. My kids are, of course, grown up now, but they have very positive, lasting memories of Singapore, and they actually send their greetings back to all of you here. And that all started, more than 2 decades ago. Since that time, we've stayed in touch and worked together. These are some of the things that have happened. In 2006, the Center for Social Development Asia was started at the Social Work Department here. It began with an inaugural speech by the education minister at the time was Tharman Shanmugaratnam, and Tharman was good enough to come and give the opening speech for that at a conference for that center to start. Again, Vasu and Sudha Nair were instrumental in making that happen. In 1995, we published a paper from the research on the Central Provident Fund, and you'll recognize these names. It's me and Sudha and Dr. Vasu and Yam Thi Luong, and Yam is here. And we published a CPF article in the Asian Journal of Political Science. In 2004, CSD co-hosted with Shandong University a conference on asset building and social development. That's in Jinan, China. Vasu came and gave a paper on social impacts of CPF. He had a co-author, and I can't remember the co-author's name right now, but that's a very good paper. Those conference papers were published in a Chinese journal. We've learned over the years, we do a lot of work with mainland China now, and have for the past couple of decades, really. It's not good enough to be publishing in English. If you want to have impact in this part of the world, you have to be speaking in their language. So publishing in Chinese is very important, and those papers in Chinese actually did contribute to discussion in China that has been important. So that's one of the pictures from that meeting. In 2009, now CSDA existed. So with the Center for Social Development Asia, we co-sponsored a meeting here in Singapore on Singaporean social policy, and At that time, Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan was the Minister of Community Development, Youth and Sports. I think he's the Minister of Education and the Environment now. You guys, these ministers are always taking so many jobs, hard to keep track of them. Training up the next leadership. So he gave the keynote address, a very productive conference, a very interesting discussion. In 2011, we partnered again with the Center for Social Development Asia at a meeting, and with Peking University in Beijing, and we co-sponsored a conference on productive aging in China. And those conference papers were published in the China Journal of Social Work in English, and a book from Peking University Press, a very respectable academic press in mainland China. So again, the theme of working together, working internationally, and when working, especially when working in China, publishing not just in English but in Chinese. In November 2012, we again partnered with Peking University and with the Center for Social Development Asia here at NUS, and co-sponsored a conference on innovations in asset building. There were more than a dozen Asian universities at that meeting, representatives from more than a dozen countries. So Professor Tan Taiyang and Ho Kong Chong gave a paper at that meeting on really the historical view. Taiyang is a, as you know, historian, a historical view of the development of Singapore's social policies, and Kong Chong, a very well-known and perceptive sociologist. It's a very good partnership to get a both historical and sociological view, and we're very happy to have that paper. Associate Professor Corinne Goh also presented a paper at that meeting, and a book is forthcoming again from Peking University Press in Chinese, and the book is under review in the UK with Taylor and Francis. So these are, in a way, I started this professorship early. So we've been working already. We will continue to do that work. So that's the group in Peking at Peking University. Quite a number of countries represented there. You may see a few faces that you recognize. Kong Chong is standing back there, and Corinne is over there. So, and other terrific colleagues. There's Kong Chong giving his remarks, and there's Corinne. So this is a conference called Lifelong Asset Building, looking at strategies and innovations in Asia. Okay, so that's the background. The work has been happening. We're picking up where we're already plowing in the field, and we will keep plowing. We'll try to be creative as we go. Now I'm going to give you a few thoughts. I'm going to switch now to kind of some pretty big big perspective ideas, and then I'm going to come back down to earth a little bit after that. So I want you to think about human beings, and sometimes we overlook this. Maybe I have this view, especially because in the United States we're such an individualistic country. We believe that everything happens by individual effort. I mean, it's become more so in recent years. So the idea that people work together is not the most popular idea, in my own cultural context. Now, in fact, however, and partly I'm raising this issue in this way because it's an important discussion at home. This may be obvious to many of you here, but humans are really highly social. I mean, humans are extremely social animals. In fact, if you look at the evolution of modern humans, a lot of perceptive archaeologists and anthropologists now look at sociality, that the aspect of humans of being social as being really the dominant characteristic of the species. And there's a biologist at Harvard, E.O. Wilson, who has a very strong thesis that it's sociality that really has made humans dominant animals. He sees sort of two groups of dominant animals in the world. Among the invertebrates, he's an ant guy, studies ants, so ants, of course, very social insects. But Wilson has discovered that ants, other than the vertebrates, if you walk out into the woods, pretty much the ants are running things. You don't really realize that, but they're pretty much in charge out there. And when you look at the vertebrates, humans have become pretty much in charge. For good and bad, and it is both good and bad, humans have dominated every other animal species and every other vertebrate species. It's possible the cockroaches will still win, but at the moment, humans are in charge of things. And Wilson says that's because of being social. It's very important to understand this. It's being social happened before advanced cognition. This is very important. There are other theories of human evolution that people became cognitively smarter, and then they learned how to work together. Wilson says other way around. They started working together, and that forced humans to develop more acute cognition. Of course, cognition leads to building spears and being able to kill the big mammals, so you get lots more calories, and the whole story of human evolution. So sociality, being social, and I emphasize this because we're in a conversation now here about social work. So I'm going to come around to this, but it's the social part of this I'm trying to emphasize and want people to understand in this larger context. That civilization now moving up to sort of more recent history, not millions of years ago, but say we're talking 10 or 12, at most 14,000 years ago, the beginning of agricultural revolution and humans starting to domesticate grains and animals and live together. So the beginning of what we commonly call civilization now. This has required massive social innovations. And these are social innovations. They're not technological innovations. And that's something I want to emphasize. So learning how to live together in groups peacefully, and in larger and larger groups as time went on, organizing work of all kinds, accumulating and distributing resources, establishing codes of conduct and rule of law. These are all social achievements. They're innovations that humans had to invent in order to make civilization happen. Building and using knowledge, having great universities like this it's not an automatic thing. Humans had to figure out how to have a university so we could begin to accumulate knowledge and then pass it on to the next generation. A tremendous boost to human advancement is being able to have this knowledge and pass it on to the next generation. So the next generation doesn't have to start from scratch. So great universities, creating governance structures that are fair and effective, establishing systems of diplomacy and security to make society stable, and especially for those of us who are working in social work, learning how to protect and promote health and well-being of citizens. So all of these conditions, and this is not the whole list, all of these conditions are social achievements. And this is an important point. These are social achievements that have made science and technology possible. It's not the other way around. It's really important to understand this. That it's really human social achievements that lay the groundwork for making it possible to find a new invention and making that new invention productive in the world. And it's this social framework that makes that possible. So, point is that social innovations, we take almost everything on this for granted. Probably you don't get, even you students in the room probably don't get up in the morning and think, oh, I'm really glad somebody invented the university so I can go to class today. We just assume that it's always been there, but it's not that it had to be created. So social innovations have to be created. They're not automatic. They have to be designed and put in place. They have to be tried out. They have to be improved over time. So there's all this work about social innovations that, and the point about this is that social innovations require work. This is not automatic. So this work, this social work, has been a major part of what humans have done over time and need to continue to do. We live in a world where most of the attention for innovation now comes with technology in the fields of technology and economics, right? The innovations are technological and outcomes that we value are economic. So, but the underlying structure of social institutions makes all of that possible. So this social work, this is a pretty broad definition of social work. This social work is a really fundamental human activity, and it's never done. This university is not going to look the same in 100 years or 200 years. People will innovate, people will try new things, and it will look a little bit different. But this social work is necessary, especially for those of us who are in the modern day definition of social work. We're working with people's family and community development and creating social policies that make it possible for people to have stable and productive lives. This part of this larger picture, and it requires work. It requires figuring out what's successful, what can help people move along in a more productive way, what can help them become stable, and that's the work that we do. Okay, so Singaporean is highly innovative. I said this before. The Central Provident Fund. Probably most of you, even you younger people, know this history. It was Provident funds were created by the British Colonial Authority. There were maybe 30 of them in various colonies in Asia and Africa. The British Colonial Authority created Provident funds for the colonies, largely because they didn't want to take on the financial responsibility of social insurance for all the colonies. So this was done to do something, but not too much, I guess. That would be a pretty good way to say it. So Provident Fund was set up so that, as you know, it was some money from workers' pay and some money from the employer. And at the time, I think the initial contributions were 5% from each. And the largely Chinese laborers in Singapore at the time referred to this as coffin money. It was a money that was accumulated so you would have something to get buried with. Today, as you know, the CPF has become, it's not the only policy framework in Singapore, but it's probably the major social policy framework. I think that's fair to say. It's a framework on which other things have been built, especially housing and home ownership, but other policies also. So they're using, and the nature of the policy quite distinctive from most social policy in the West, or in much of the world. Most social policy in the world is this is oversimplification, but you could categorize as income support. That the idea is that people have a certain amount of income to get by for a period of time if they're in a situation where they need that income. So if they're retired, or if they're disabled, or if they've lost a job, there may be some social policy that can help them with some income during that period of time. It's been actually a very effective social policy in much of the industrial era. I'm a social worker. I'm quite in favor of providing support to people so they're not destitute. But the evidence on income-based social policy or income-oriented social policy is that people are supported, but they really tend not to do better over time. So it's not an investment-oriented policy. It's not how can I say this? Not an aspirational policy. And the Central Provident Fund, although it too has some challenges, is built on a different idea, which is that money should accumulate and then people can use that money for their future. So there's much more accumulating resources for long-term support and hopefully long-term development. So again, not perfect, but it's a different. It's also an idea of support. There's also quite a lot of government involvement in the CPF, although the Singapore government tries to say that's not, tries to downplay that. Actually, there's quite a lot of intervention going on from the Singapore government, especially with asset building at the very bottom. So it's not really a matter of government, doing something or not. It's really government doing something different. And here it really is a little bit different. So these policies, now the CPF, as you know, is there for home ownership, some parts of healthcare, education, insurances, various kinds of investments. Over time, it elaborates and covers more different areas of sort of family, social, and economic development as the policy goes along. So it's important to understand this. No other country does social policy in this way, to this extent. Singapore, really very distinctive. The first major CPF innovation was in 1968, and this was not long after independence. And the innovation was to increase employer and employee contributions from, I think it was still 5% at the time, or it might have gone up to 10% by then, but increase them up to 20% each, which has been the norm over the past 50 years, although at times it's I think a little bit less than that now. But over time, much of the time has been 20% each. So to increase these contributions up to 20% and to make CPF available for home ownership. This was the real innovation. I was fortunate enough to have interviews with the then Senior Minister Lee Kuan Yew and Dr. Goh Keng Swee in 1992-93. Dr. Vasu also made this possible. Dr. Vasu makes a lot of things possible for people. And I asked the senior minister, and I mean, I was like talking to, just like talking to SR Nathan. I mean, you're talking to like amazing people who have been, really helped create modern Singapore. I felt very fortunate to be able to have that opportunity. And one of the questions I asked was, why did you change the Central Provident Fund, to open it up for housing in 1968? The answer, particularly from Lee Kuan Yew, was that I thought I would get a social development answer. Well, people need to have homes. I got a national security answer, which was that if Singaporeans own their home, they might stay and fight for the country. If you know the history of Singapore, you can appreciate that. It was at the time. At this time, in the 60s, not altogether clear that Singapore would survive as an independent nation. Very, very unstable politically and dangerous situations with neighbors. So it was not to be taken for granted. And leadership at the time was looking for a way to use social policies that might reinforce the stability of Singapore as a country. So in other words, now it's interesting to think about this because, I'm an academic, so I try to be theoretical when, try to say, well, what's the idea here? Not just that something is done, but why is it done? So there's an implied theory here that if people own their homes, they will feel more committed to that property, basically, have, in this sense, build a national identity, which had never really been created in Singapore. Singapore was a lot of migrant labor during all the colonial period. There never was a real national identity. So build a national identity and commitment to being a Singaporean and, if necessary, fighting for the country. So this is a social development idea. This is a nation building idea, and the idea is that if people have some property, they will then feel more committed to that nation and be more active and engaged citizens. This actually, this in my own history in the United States, this is not very different from what Thomas Jefferson said. Thomas Jefferson, this is an early leader in America, very much involved at the time of independence, wrote our Declaration of Independence. So in a way, similar period of history. And Thomas Jefferson believed that the strength of America would be that people would own small property, and then they would, on the basis of small property ownership, they would be more engaged citizens. It's a very similar idea. So I guess one of the points I would like to make here, this is, I can be a little provocative here at the moment. We can discuss in the questions if you like. This is not, notice here, that a lot of times these are interpreted as cultural issues, that, there's very different Eastern Confucianist culture, very different from the West. I'm pretty skeptical about these explanations. I think what's going on here is actually much more objective and could be identified as owning a piece of property, holding some assets will have some positive impacts on people's commitment to those assets and and interacting in the world where those assets are held. And I think that's true everywhere. So that's a little provocative. This is like social science now. Is it different here? Is it different there? These are ultimately empirical questions, but I believe that that owning some assets probably has similar impacts in all the cultures around the world. So we'd be glad to talk about that. Okay, so Singapore has now over 90% home ownership. I haven't seen the exact statistics, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think this is in the ballpark, something like this. Has been like this for quite a while. It is a source of stability, widely taken to be a source of stability and basic support for Singaporeans. It's important to recognize we live in a time of increasing inequality in the world. I'll talk more about that in a minute. It's important to recognize that that this home ownership provides, even though we have increasing income inequality, this level of home ownership in Singapore is supporting a lot of very low income households. They may not have much income, may be highly stressed because they don't have much income, but they do, many of them do have a flat, and some of them have some net positive equity in that flat, and it provides a measure of stability in their lives that would not exist otherwise. Really, I think it's hard to see that unless you're outside of Singapore, but I live in a country where not only do people, you know, are getting lower and lower incomes at the bottom, but the bottom 20% of the U.S. population has an average net worth that is negative. I mean, this is really, so you're talking about a huge portion of the population whose lives are terrifically unstable because they have no base in asset ownership and in this case, for the place that they live. So this is an important point. And I think it's a point that's underrepresented in Singapore. I would love it if the Singapore government would start to publish statistics on asset owning and liabilities and net worth of the Singapore population. Very reluctant to do that. I believe that this would be a constructive thing to do in terms of understanding how policies are effective or not effective in Singapore, and it would help a lot to engage in international discussions. So that's also something I'll be glad to talk about. But in any case, no other country has quite the same level of widespread home ownership, especially among people with very low incomes. Really just doesn't exist in other places. Okay, so back to research agenda, back to earth here. A few more big ideas. In the information age, this is about inequality. In the information age, we are apparently in more globalized labor markets. This is not news to anybody here. They're more competitive, they're less secure, and because of this, labor income is shrinking, especially at the bottom. This happening everywhere. There's another trend that's happening, and maybe not as well known. Worldwide, if you look at the total production in the world, worldwide, a larger proportion of the total production is going to capital instead of labor. This also is a very definite trend. So the big picture is that if you look at all of the income pie in the world, capital is taking more of it over time. And then if you look at the part that's left over for labor, it's being distributed in a more unequal way. This means that people at the bottom are going to be probably going to be under increasing stress for incomes. This is a very serious issue. The issue is, it's not entirely a humanitarian issue. I'm in social work, so we will often talk about things in terms of decency and human kindness. I want to talk about it. I believe that. I would also like to talk about it in terms of fairness and justice, and I believe that too. But I want to talk about it also in terms of practical matters of how do you run a country. If you've got a larger and larger group of people at the bottom who don't have enough resources to support a family and raise their children well, and so their children can become educated, then this is not just a problem for low-income people. This is a problem for your country, right? Because you're not educating the next generation. So this issue is with us, and we have to figure out. You in Singapore have to figure it out. In the United States, we have to figure it out. And this is from the standpoint of social work, or people who are working with people who are more disadvantaged, then this is an issue that has to be at the top right now. So we're getting rising inequality in income and assets. So in this context, I think that there has to be a shift in the way the world thinks. We typically tend to think about well-being as relying on labor income. It's a kind of default position. People need to have a job, and then they have a job and they can support a family. I believe we will be in a world where having a job will be less and less adequate for supporting a family. So this is the challenge. So how do we think about conditions that enable very low-income people to be stable and to be somewhat content and raise their children well? So I don't know the answer to this, but I would put asset building on the list. That not only do we need to think about people's incomes, but we need to think about ways that they can hold some assets that provide some stability in their lives, even though their incomes might not be fully adequate. So that's the big picture for that. There's also a rationale for saving and asset building, which is this is back to the theoretical statement. We're developing, and then I'll show you some examples of this if we have time today. I'll get roped in here in a while. I don't have a clock here. It also seems to be the case, and we're developing a growing body of evidence that Lee Kuan Yew was right, that if people do own something, they will behave differently. And I'll show you some more specific evidence about that. And mostly these changes in behavior are desirable. They're not all desirable, but they're mostly changes that we would think in terms of being kind of positive middle class attributes. That people are more stable, they care about their kids' education, they're more likely to be engaged in the community, and so on. If people have great wealth, you may get some other attributes that are not quite so, not always quite so good, but sometimes those are also good. So that it's a complicated situation. I know it's not simple, but mostly you get a lot of what in the U.S. anyway we would call middle class kind of behaviors that are largely desirable. So asset building probably creates not just material conditions, that is, having some resources, but also psychological and social conditions that help families stabilize and do better. Okay, so now shifting to the policy arena. Singapore started doing this asset building policy a long time ago, but actually the world's starting to catch up with you in some kind of odd ways. Asset building policies are becoming more common. They're showing up in more parts of the world. In the United States now, we have major asset building policies for home ownership and retirement savings. These operate almost entirely through the tax system. We'll come back to that in a minute. Other innovations that we've had in the U.S., and the U.S. is not unique here. This also happening in much of Western Europe and other places. We have college savings plans. We now have health savings plans. We have various kinds of job training savings plans. And we're in a period of innovating all of these small, and they are kind of small compared to the Central Provident Fund, certainly, asset building projects around the country. So this is an emerging idea. You folks were doing it and not really talking about it very much, but now the rest of the world's kind of figuring this out. Except that this policy in most other places is often very regressive. Here, there's been a real emphasis on kind of asset building that largely included not all, but most of the low-income population, and with subsidies to the low-income population, for example, in pricing HDB flats and so on. But all the subsidies in these asset building projects in the United States go to the top. So we're spending now in the United States actually over $400 billion annually in tax expenditures for asset holding in homes and various kinds of investments in retirement accounts. So these are public resources that are handed out through the tax system that are increasing the asset holdings for people who have good jobs and above median incomes. Over 90% of these subsidies right now in the United States go to the top half, earning over $50,000 a year. Over 90% go to the top half. It's a lot of. If this policy was a direct expenditure, it would never fly. I mean, people but because it's a tax expenditure, then that is, it's just a reduction in your taxes. It's not a direct benefit. Then it's kind of hidden and the public not keenly aware about it. So it's not much discussed. This pattern is similar to many other countries. The poor people in America don't have the same kind of access to asset accumulation. There's nothing similar to the kind of support that you would provide for a low-income family purchasing an HDB flat, for example. Because these operate through the tax expenditure, most low-income families have little or no tax obligations, so they don't qualify for the subsidy. So the questions for this body of work in my country, the questions are: why not asset building for the whole population, and why not asset building in every country? So these are questions that we've tried to put out on the table. So a little bit on applied research now. So applied research, applied social research. This is back into the general discussion of social things require work. So I think about this as a kind of social work, that we have to figure out these social arrangements and we have to test them and we have to put them into place, so that people's conditions can be better. So how do we go about that? With a topic like asset building, it's kind of a grand idea. So I had to think about, well, what you have to make this real in the world, you have to boil it down to an actual instrument. You have to do something, and you have to describe it so people know what it is, and then you have to test it in the real world to see if it works. It's actually been quite a long process, interesting process. So this idea has to engage. It's not that this idea is going to solve every problem, right? At this point, this is like just test. It's a research and development idea. You're testing an idea to see if the concept is good. So you're trying to engage the underlying issue. At the same time, you're trying to make the issue visible to people. When I first started talking in the United States about asset building policy 25 years ago, this term didn't exist. It wasn't something that anyone had thought about. There was no discussion about such policies at all. So how do you make it visible and understandable in simple terms? The job here is, you're trying to put something in place where you have to communicate to a lot of people. It's not just talking to your professor next door. It's like talking to policymakers, general public, poor people on the street who might be recipients of this or participants in this policy. Everyone has to understand it. So it has to be simple, and then it has to be researchable. That is, you have to be able to build a body of evidence. So these are standards for doing essentially applied social science, applied intervention social science, which is what social work is. So the proposal that I talked with a bunch of low-income mothers before I specified this idea. So the proposal ended up being special savings accounts that would start as early as birth. They could be subsidized for the poor. There could be multiple and flexible sources of deposits into these accounts. Financial education would be attached to them, and they could be used for what we defined as development purposes at the time, for homeowning, for education, business, or other development purposes. So that proposal was first made actually in the late 80s, but published a book in 1991. So we did, and since that time we've done a lot of research, and so I'll summarize some of this. It was a very common response in the beginning that poor people can't save. I mean, that was the biggest response. Well, poor people can't save. Why are you trying to make them save? Actually, a lot of people took the position that it was bad for poor people to save, and it's really, even if you're proposing a policy that's optional, that, you set up conditions, I would say to them, well, why don't you provide the same incentives for poor people to accumulate assets that you have, and then let's see if they can save. But it's hard to get people to see that. So it turns out that very poor people will save if they're in situations where they have an incentive and they have a structure to save it. In other words, they have a policy to work within. Not all of them, but a lot of them will save. And so we were getting average monthly saving among the whole treatment group of about $16 a month. And actually, that's a little bit misleading because about half the participants weren't very good savers, but about half of them were good savers. So the half that were really saving were saving more like about $30 a month. So actually a substantial amount of money in households where really savings hadn't existed before. And that money was being matched usually 2 to 1 or 3 to 1. So money would accumulate after a couple of years. It would be sufficient to make a down payment on a house. Or sufficient to begin to help pay for tuition or some other development purpose. So we actually got past this discussion of poor people can't save. I mean, if I had to say the impact of all this research on individual development accounts is that it's widely understood in America now that poor people will save. I know that might seem like a small thing, but it took us a long time to get there. Now, evidence about psychological effects. If you talk to IDA participants about having an IDA in qualitative research, and my wife Margaret did this work, she does very careful qualitative research. I have to say, Margaret's not here today. She does excellent work and works on most of our project. Her name also begins with M. So a lot of times, in academic work, you have a bibliography that says you just put your first initial and then your last name. So M. Sherraden, when it's M. Sherraden, I usually get the credit. So I often say that, I'm not joking about this, that, if it hadn't been for Margaret, I probably never would have been tenured in the university. It's like, she's just always there doing all this work, and half the time I'm getting the credit for it. So she's not here, but she did all this work. So basically, people pretty positive about having an IDA account. First time they had some assets, they're very positive that they have this asset. Actually, IDA programs are structured like toward goals. So like, why are you saving? I want to save for a down payment on a home. People like the structure. They like having the goal. IDA programs, the way they were implemented in the U.S. was about 3 to 5 year savings, so people could save for 3 to 5 years, and then they could spend their money. And we find positive impacts on home ownership in experimental conditions between IDAs and control group. So people like that, quite positive about it. Express having some control in their life for the first time, not being so vulnerable. There's a quote here: the IDA gets you back on track, you get back going up the ladder. So it's this aspirational idea. This is Lee Kuan Yew was right about it. It's like, it's aspirational. I can get somewhere. My life isn't just trying to get through the month, but I can maybe do a little better, or my kid can do a little better. There was another large experiment on IDAs in Canada called the Learn Save demonstration. This was a larger sample than the one we had in the U.S. They found this was oriented toward education and livelihood, so education and education and jobs, and found positive impacts on budgeting and saving, found positive impacts on life satisfaction, found positive impacts on educational enrollment, which one of the tangible goals, and positive impacts on small business ownership. So generally positive results from a very large IDA project. I should say also that these IDA projects they may be matching people for 2 to 1 or 3 to 1, but still we're talking about public expenditures of at most a few $1,000s a year. And if you compare to a lot of social services, that it's not, if you're providing many kinds of social service, it's not hard to use up that much money with a family during a year. So, and we haven't done all these comparisons the way we should, but these are not relatively very large public expenditures, and we get pretty positive results. So this is back to the American Dream demonstration. It's This is the IDA experiment in the U.S. Only 7.6% of the participants said they were saving for education. So, and we're testing on the whole sample now. So we have a sample of treatment and controls. Only 7.6% of the treatment group said they're saving in their IDA for education. Nevertheless, 10 years later, and this was, so the IDA project only lasted 4 years. So this is 6 years after the project ended. So it's actually, those of you who work in social research or do experimental research know a quite common pattern to get some kind of impact on something, but then after a few years the impact just drifts away. Very, very common pattern. Here we have an impact that actually got stronger after the program ended. So 10 years after the beginning of the IDA program and 6 years after that program ended, we get a positive impact on education especially among men. For educational participation. Quite remarkable result. And this was a largely low-income group. Low-income men in America are in trouble. I mean, in terms of participation in the labor market, they're like dropping out. We have a large number of young men in America now who are neither in education or jobs, who are just somewhere. So finding a positive impact on very low-income young men is a result that provides some reason to believe that this might be a strategy that can be positive. It's not that these strategies will solve every problem, and no strategy will. But if there's a strategy that is a relatively small investment and can have a positive result, then this is something that becomes doable for public policy. So this is a Native American person who has a new home. She also was in the American Dream demonstration. I didn't put in as many pictures here as I could have of you. I've had to learn. I'm not a picture-oriented person. I'm like a word-oriented person. So I've had to learn from my kids and other people, my staff, that you should put in pictures. So I did that. Okay, so influence of research results. This idea, IDAs are a common idea in the United States now. They're not widespread, but they're in most states. There is federal funding for these projects. They're relatively still small. We have, during this period of time, as I said, we have health savings accounts. We have various kinds of other savings projects that are started. When President Clinton was president, he did propose universal asset building policies, and we were working with the White House at the time. So he proposed universal savings accounts in 1999. That was a name that I suggested to him. I like it because the acronym is USA. And the next year, it changed the proposal to retirement savings accounts. So these would have been very large, lifelong savings accounts, but they didn't get anywhere at the time. So I would say that in the U.S., where we are now is that this is an active policy discussion. It's not a marginal discussion. Neither have we succeeded in having a substantial policy. But the language is very common. People bring it up in various contexts. And the nature of the discussion is in some ways quite positive. I'll come back to that. This work on IDAs influenced the Blair government in the United Kingdom. So they began. The Prime Minister was interested in this, but really the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Gordon Brown, at the time was more interested. And Brown initiated the Savings Gateway, which is like IDAs in the U.S., and it was IDA results that had affected that. They initiated the Child Trust Fund in the United Kingdom. This was the first truly universal and progressive asset building policy. So Singapore has since done more with its children accounts, so becoming universal. At the time, though, it wasn't quite universal in the sense that everybody have an account. Child Trust Fund automatically gave every baby an account at birth. And this project was successful, but in 2010 the government changed hands, so Labor went out and a coalition government came in, and it was, as you know, worldwide financial crisis and recession, but in the budget cutting in the UK, and so the Child Trust Fund and the Saving Gateway got put on hold. I just had an email from a colleague in the UK a couple of weeks ago, however, saying that the Child Trust Funds account that were created are still there. So they stopped funding the new ones, but the ones that are still there. And he said that families are putting more money than ever into these accounts. So quite interesting situation. You start a policy, it's successful, you kill it, and it's still successful. At least it's successful for the five cohorts in the UK have these accounts. So it'll be interesting to see as this cohort moves through the education system what they look like and if they turn out to be any different. Okay, so we worked in Korea. In Seoul, there's a Hope Development account. There is the Seoul Welfare Foundation, which is kind of quasi-governmental in the city, has at least 30,000 IDAs. This project won a public service award from the United Nations in 2010, and IDAs are now in at least 4 other Korean cities. So projects in Korea. We have a lot of discussions in mainland China, and occasionally have some projects there. And there's interest in mainland China and Singapore, of course. And it's not, I guess if there's one place where Singaporeans' voice and policy has had an impact, I think it's in mainland China. Not that they've adopted what you do, but they're paying a lot of attention, of course. So this idea of asset building exists in mainland China. We did have a project for in far western China, in Xinjiang. We had a project in a little town called Hutubi, where retirement savings, lifelong retirement savings, was being used as active assets, and it was called, the government in Beijing referred to it as asset building policy. So they kind of actually an innovator, an administrator way out in western China, which is a long way from Beijing. I don't know if you guys have flown across China, but it's like the distance between New York and California in my country. It's a long way. So it's a little place out there, and this innovator decides to do, to experiment, to try something. Try to make this retirement savings program into an active assets program where farmers could use the money for investing in agriculture, not just waiting until they retire. Actually, the data quite successful. This project was copied in a couple of other places, and then some other administrator in Shanghai started to do this and steal the money, and then that. So I think that's sort of on hold. This is the nature of this work, and you can kind of see it's like you try things. It runs into all kinds of political situations or whatever. It's just the nature of things. It's not ever 5 steps forward. It's always 3 steps forward and sometimes 3 steps back before you can take 2 steps forward. So it's always that's the nature of the work. But I think that's the nature of really almost all work, that it is going to do something. Nothing that is difficult that you're trying to figure out is going to come very easily. It may. When you read about it in the newspaper, it doesn't matter. I don't think it matters what the area of work it is. It could be the arts. It could be engineering. It could be social work. It could be anything. You read about it in the paper. Somebody has some success. Then you think, oh wow, if the story almost always will be that this person has been working at this for a long time and managing to work through failures in order to get to where they're trying to go. So it's just life. It's the nature of innovation of any kind, and we try to take it in that spirit. Okay, I'm going to hurry a little bit. This is the fellow on the right is a farmer out in Hutubi. This is actually his former house. He now uses to store grain and supplies. You can see the house has a little bit of a problem, but he used I should have taken a different picture. He used his asset building account to build another large room onto this house where the family now lives. So the old house no longer has to be a family quarters, and it was able to provide new. We took the picture to show the condition of the old house. Family doing very well and happy to have their new place. So a bunch of other examples of IDA research internationally. We have various projects working with sometimes governments, sometimes private sector organizations, sometimes non-governmental organizations in various parts of the world. Okay, so this is one of my former PhD students. She's in Uganda here with an IDA project, quite successful IDA projects, and this person used the money to start a small business, sewing. Okay, I only have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to try to use the time to talk about children's accounts toward lifelong asset building. This was actually my original proposal for individual development accounts, that they would be universal and they would start at birth and so on. But this wasn't what IDAs became, so we've started using a different name called child development accounts. You also use this name in Singapore. So various countries now have some version of child development account policies, and I think they hold a lot of promise because you're starting you really have the possibility of a lifelong system of asset building. So Lee Kim Wah is here, and he's a good friend and has run these projects in Singapore for some time, and he switched jobs now, so I no longer can ask him what's going on with the child development accounts. But Singapore, why savings account for children? Actually, quite a lot of evidence that if there's savings account for children, children will be better off. Let me take the time to give you some of these data. Another one of my former graduate students, Willie Elliott, he's now on the faculty at University of Kansas. Gina, who I just showed you, is on the faculty at University of North Carolina. Willie Elliott has been doing research using longitudinal data sets. So this is desk research using longitudinal data, and finding that the presence of an account in a child's name has a huge impact on whether a child will go to college. And you can control for everything else that's in the data set. This is a panel study of income dynamics. You can control for their income and their race, education, control for everything. You can even control for the amount of money in the child's savings account. That is, statistically, all you've been measuring is the existence of the account. And the existence of the account, it makes it 6 times more likely that child will stay on course in college education. That is, go to college and stay there. This is this statistic got reported all over the United States where everybody was studying. So we were proud of this research, but this is back to the point of if people have some assets, then it may change the way they think about the future. So what's happening here is not that this money it's not the material effect of the money. It's that the parents think and the kid thinks that she's going to college. And they're thinking about this from the beginning of their life. This we have found to be a really prominent impact. Okay, I don't have time to go through all this, but as you know, this is a little summary of Singapore's policy. Singapore has by far the most extensive child account policies anywhere. You're investing in children in various ways with the baby bonus, the child development account, EduSave accounts, and post-secondary education accounts far more than any other country. The theme of your investment is very much human capital development. It's really this money for developing children, developing them pre-post-secondary for resources that they might need for tutoring or experiences that are valuable, and then for educational funds post-secondary. Talked about the child trust fund. I don't have time to talk about all this. We have a large experiment in Ghana. These are youth save participants in Ghana. We're running. I'm amazed that we're able to do this, but we're running a very large random sample experiment in Ghana across the whole country. We have a great team at the University of Ghana, the Institute for Statistical and Social Research. Really terrific people. There's no way that we would be able to do this without them. I mean, it would be foolish to even begin. But we're being able to do this, and we will have actually, inline data coming in later this year, and it looks like these kids are able to save, and treatment kids are able to save in these accounts, and our dependent variable of interest is not just did they save in these accounts, but Do they make the transition from primary to secondary school? This is a big issue in Ghana. If young people are not able to go to secondary school but drop out of school at primary, they will be effectively street children. The prospects for their lives economically are not very good. And actually the prospects for their lives, health in terms of health, also not very good, because they will become at much higher risk of HIV/AIDS. So keeping kids in school in Ghana is not just a financial issue, it's a health issue. And we have reason to believe, based on other experiments that we've done in Uganda, is another one of my former graduate students, Fred Sewamala, he's now on the faculty at Columbia University, has found that if kids in primary school in Uganda have a savings account, it affects not only their ability to stay in school, but their health attitudes and their health behavior. So we still don't have like health outcomes for these kids, but we know it's affected their health behavior. So that's the project in Ghana. So let me just take the last couple minutes. We have a large experiment running now in the state of Oklahoma. This is called Seed for Oklahoma Kids, a randomly assigned experiment. So again, this is treatment and control, automatic accounts at birth. The policy idea is a universal and progressive account for children. So we're testing that idea. Let me give you a couple of the results before I turn to the conclusion. This experiment, very well done. So one of the really important results is that in the treatment group we did opt out instead of opt in. So this language has been in Singapore for decades. You know the behavioral economists in the world discovered it about 10 years ago. So the difference between opt out and opt in, which you guys had figured out a very long time ago. So the idea is that if you have to opt into something, that means you have to sign up for it. But if you have to opt out, that basically they put you in and then you have to do something to get out. The effect of a straight opt out and opt in is huge. So for example, in retirement plans in the United States, it's especially difficult to get low-income workers to opt into a retirement plan because they would rather have the money. But if you do an opt-out, you can double the participation in retirement plans. You can go from like 45% to 85%. It's really an amazing effect. In Singapore, this is not quite fair, but there's sort of various versions of opt-out, right? In Singapore, some of the opt-out is, you can opt out, but you better not. This seems to be particularly effective. So we're learning a lot more about opt-in and opt-out. And the seed experiment, we had 1,361 treatment mothers, that is mothers who had this savings account for their child. One mother out of 1,360 opted out. She did it for religious reasons. She was a Muslim, and this was an account that was going to accrue interest, so her understanding of Sharia law was that she shouldn't participate in that account. But other than that, we had basically 100% participation. The issues with Muslim finance can be resolved. People work on these issues, and I think over time, I'm sure we could, even in the United States, we can figure out how to do that. So one is we've demonstrated you can do a universal program, that is, you can get everyone in. This is a really big point. I'm probably going to go over time here, just a minute. So how do I think about this? You know, most economists think about some kind of saving and asset building on a kind of individual level. How much did she save and how much did she save? I mean, this is the kind of question that's had. There's actually a prior question which is more fundamental. And that prior question is there a structure in which she can do this and it will be very easy for her to do? Think about this as, you think about this in public health terms as plumbing. So if maybe in Singapore 50 or 60 years ago, when you guys, independence, 50 years ago? I don't really know, but maybe there was some parts of Singapore where there wasn't yet running water. It's, perfectly conceivable. So the issue, so in those situations, in the morning, everybody in those households has to get up and go get water at wherever the local supply of water might be. So But with development, we decide, well, that's really inefficient. People have to go look for water. Their water may not be as clean. They spend a lot of time looking for water. We can reduce sickness, and we can make lives easier if we have running water. So this is, the basic public health issue. So now in the morning, everybody in Singapore who needs water, they just turn on the tap, right? This is how you get your water. This is not automatic. I mean, we take it for granted, but this whole structure of water coming to your house is something that had to be figured out. I think, I don't have time to talk about this, I think that we have to look at financial services going forward as pretty much like that. Pretty much like a plumbing system that reaches everyone and is relatively easy and can happen for them without a lot of effort, and these are safe and secure financial products that will make their lives better. We have a lot of work to do to figure that out, because right now the way we think about financial services is pretty much like the way people used to go get water. You get your bucket in the morning and you go out there and you try to find your water. And someone will, in financial services, at least in my country, someone will sell you some really bad products. So there's a whole issue here about structure. This is social innovation. This is not individual economic behavior. This is not what this is about. This is social innovation. How do you create this structure so that people can participate in a way that's good for them? So we have to figure that out. Central Provident Fund is one of those systems. You probably take that for granted, but most countries don't have a Central Provident Fund. So what we're demonstrating here is something like the beginning of what it would take to have something like a universal account structure like that. Okay, so we're able to do that. Let me just give you one more result, because we just found these results that were just published the week before I came over here. So this was the end of January. These are experimental results. They were published in JAMA Pediatrics. JAMA is the Journal of the American Medical Association, very high-ranked journal in America, very well-respected journal. So we find at wave 2, so the kids in the Seed OK experiment, remember, some of them have accounts for college, some of them don't. We find that the kids who have an account for college at age 4 have better social emotional development than the control kids. Now here, this is back to, do attitudes and behaviors change? Can people's lives be better because they're holding some kind of asset? In this case, even a small asset. And here we have experimental evidence, quite rigorous experimental evidence suggesting there's better social emotional development. So we're thrilled about these results, and we actually have another paper coming. This paper is not accepted yet, but I'm hoping it will be, showing that the mothers of the treatment kids have higher expectations for their children's education. Because they have this account. Okay, so that's the nature of the work. It's ideas and testing ideas. So what do I think about this? Politically, these ideas are popular. The media, at least in America, loves child development accounts, so we don't have any problem with the media attention. We also don't have any trouble with political issues, either Republican or Democrat, very bipartisan support. So I think we can make progress on this. We actually, in early March, there's a state I'm not permitted to say which state it is, there's a state in the U.S. that will announce a universal and progressive child development account with initial $500 deposit. We've been working with them for quite a while. The results from our Seed for Oklahoma Kids study have influenced the policymakers in that state. And we're talking with several other states. This idea seems to be catching on. So we're hopeful that several states will start to do a universal account, and then we're hopeful that federal government will pay attention to that and create a universal account structure. So probably a lot of work to do. Probably, we'll be taking 3 steps back again, but right now it is all looking very positive. Okay, so Counselor, everybody, my idea about this is, this is a little bit romantic, but I think we have to think, why not an account for every child on the planet? I know that might sound expansive, but this will increasingly be doable. With information technology, it will be possible to deliver asset building account to every child with multiple sources of flows into those accounts. Think about this. So just something to think about. You don't have to be like stuck with the world. There will be social innovations, especially you young people. There will be social innovations in your life. So, begin to think about where things might go. I think Singapore can play a role in this. You do more children's accounts than other people. You do more asset building than other people. So I'm hoping that we can use this professorship to continue this kind of discussion and engage with other countries in the region and outside the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sherraden, for the very comprehensive lecture. I think you started from very abstract, big ideas, and then lots of examples, good examples and concrete. Thanks for rushing through. We actually are in good time. I think we have about 15 minutes, 20 minutes for questions. Maybe to facilitate more, we can collect like 3 questions, and then Prof can answer. Anyone? Yes. Can you go to the microphone? Prof Bao is going to the microphone. Are there anyone else who wants to ask questions? Okay.
Thank you, Michael, for a very stimulating lecture. I learned a great deal. Michael Sherraden and I, when in '92 he was a Fulbright scholar, I was a visiting professor at the same time at NUS. So that is the first time I got to know him, and we have kept in touch with each other, and I'm delighted to see him again. My question is, I really do not know much about asset building. But at the same time, in this part of the world as well as outside, the Grameen Bank concept has been quite well established, and my question is, what is exactly the Grameen Bank and your models are different in what way? And second thing is this, do you, especially you have been so involved in Asia, are you involved in any way in the South Asia, especially Bangladesh?
Thank you. Another question?
Hi, sorry. Pardon if my question doesn't sound smart. I was just wondering, because we are talking about match savings over here, right? I mean, how do you and your team come to this format of match savings instead of maybe higher interest savings plan, or maybe a micro asset management kind of format, kind of things?
Excuse me, can you tell us who you are?
My name is
Careful.
Kayan from Carnegie Council.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we can, Michael, you can answer.
Okay. I'll take them in order. It's difficult to provide a simple answer, but the Grameen Bank is part of part of microcredit movement. So the major difference is going from loans instead of from savings. The reality is that the very poor people need both. So it's not that one or the other is a bad idea. But the microcredit industry has figured out that people also need savings. So the Grameen Bank now has savings products and not just credit products. I would say that's the main. I could go on for a little bit about this, but I think that's the major difference. The question about how do you come up with match savings is a very good question. We needed, because the context was the United States, so the only way that public benefits for assets were being passed out was through the tax system. We knew we couldn't use the tax system, so we had to have some kind of direct expenditure that would subsidize savings for people at the bottom. in order to test the idea. It was really, what can you get that would test the idea? I think our thinking was that matching savings was a way to represent an individual participating and then government participating too. So it represented a partnership that we liked. In some ways, this has worked out pretty well. In some ways, it's kind of cumbersome. So actually, and based on the research that we've done in the last 20 years, we're probably more keenly interested right now on opening an account and providing an initial deposit. Just getting people started and putting some money in it. Because there appear to be very positive effects from doing that, and it's also administratively a lot easier. So you have to think about what's easy to administer, what's easy to do the accounting for, and so that's much simpler and probably much more effective.
I think Prof. Bao also had a question about whether you have worked in South Asia.
Oh yeah, we haven't done much in South Asia. I did give a talk in Dhaka a couple of years ago, and Muhammad Yunus was supposed to be on the same program, but he was fighting with the Prime Minister at the time, and she was changing government, going after the Grameen Bank, so I wasn't able to engage in that discussion. But we haven't been invited to work in South Asia, and we kind of work by invitation. If we're not, there have been discussions about being in India doing projects in various ways, but none of them have quite come together. So we're interested in doing that, but we haven't. Yeah.
I don't think any of the reason I also asked for South Asia is that I don't know how many of you are familiar that in 2006, India passed one of the most ambitious projects called the National Rural Employment Guarantees Act. And there is a guaranteed money which is now being paid, and for any farmer who is unemployed can get 100 days of job to do manual labor. And within that project, there is asset growth. So this might be something which would be a fertile alternative.
So actually, it's a very innovative part of the world. If I had to, I'll come back to India in a minute, but let me stay on Bangladesh for a minute. If you had to look at where is there innovative social development happening, Bangladesh is like some kind of kitchen for social development. It's amazing what happens in Bangladesh. There's not only the Grameen Bank, but BROC, which in many ways a very successful social development organization, and others. So and India, of course, all kinds of interesting things going on. And I could say about India also, if you're thinking about working internationally and you're thinking about holding assets, one of the issues that you run into immediately is, do people have a legal identity? It's pretty hard to open a bank account unless you have a legal ID. Much of the world, actually, 38% of the children in the world are born without a legal identity. This is a huge. If I had more time, I would take this issue up. This is an issue that something could be done about. But a lot of folks in South Asia have not had legal identity. So actually, it's a place where hundreds of thousands of people, hundreds of millions of people actually don't have an identity. But India now has a project of getting an identity to the population. This project will open up all kinds of development doors. And so India is doing some things that will make really interesting, because once you have an identity, you can deliver financial services in very creative ways. So.
Another round of questions? Anyone else would like to ask a question? Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Tara. I'm from Central Provident Fund Service Center. I'm not so sure if this is a question, but basically, I was very interested when you were telling us about how Singapore has had so many innovative policies, which I agree. But what was interesting for me is how did you make your program successful? I mean, what led to the positive experimental impact on education after 10 years? Because what I think is,
important in Singapore is we already have a lot of innovative policies. But what we don't have is the challenge to how do we communicate the social innovation, the social policies that's supposed to be very good to the public in a way that they will not get misunderstood, in a way that they will realize that the government is actually taking care of them instead of it's a top-down. You were mentioning about there is one opt-out and something about could be related to cultural. And Singapore is also multiracial, multicultural, and I think for us social workers, we are basically trying to find a way to communicate to the public that this policy is good because we believe so, but how to get them to believe so too. Another challenge is, for example, in our owning a home in Singapore, we are telling them, okay, this is how the government is taking care of you. But then there is also these agents that suddenly call them and say, okay, you better sell your house because you will get subsidy from the government. So it's this, we have policy that is assisting people, but because the policy is so innovative, it's getting more complicated for the people. And because the private world is also around, and they're also taking advantage. And our struggle here now is how can we ensure that we have positive results instead of unhelpful development of identity of family and individuals. For example, for people to think that I'm a failure, or I'm unable to make my own decisions. Social workers have to explain to me, I'm supposed to take this account because this is the best, but I actually don't understand. In the end, it will solve and then save my children's future, but I actually don't understand how it is. I'm unable to understand simple policy because I think Singapore has developed very fast that some people are actually left behind. And I think the importance of coming up with a new social innovation that will take care of this. And you are talking about 1968, when we are still wanting people to feel Singapore is home. Now, a lot of Singaporeans are actually foreigners, and we are having this foreign spouse. And sometimes when the husband passes away, you are talking about children without legal identity. CPF is there for Singaporean. When the father passes away, the children will stay with the mother who does not have Singaporean identity. I think it's time for Singapore to move on after giving inspiration to other countries and actually come up with a new innovation.
Thank you for that multi-layered question, which has to do, I think, from what I understand, the stage of development in Singapore, the types of policies that become more complicated, and the different types of families and how to help them, and the communication to that.
Yeah, I'm sure you know much more about this than I do, and it sounds like you've been thinking about it very productively. So, your generation will have to figure out every generation will face new challenges, and it's never the case that everything is working just fine. There will always be things that can be better, and times will change, and you will have to adapt. So I'm sure your generation will take on these issues and begin to think about things that are responsive to the conditions that you see. I'm sure that your observations are right about this. I just don't, I'm not in a position to have recommendations about it. I'm glad that you're thinking about it.
Maybe we just have one last question. I think Shihao is impatiently waiting.
Hi, I'm Shihao from Central Singapore Community Development Council. So we've been running a match savings program of our own for low-income families for several years. But I think our assumption has been that we need to pair the match savings component with very stringent financial literacy education. And so we have structured, rigorous process about it with education, financial counseling. But maybe, I'd like to consult you on whether that assumption is actually accurate. Do you actually need to link it so closely or stringently with a financial literacy education? I think that's one. Actually, I have a second question, is that we're also thinking about extending it to children. but we're not sure what age is it. Do you need to wait for them to maybe be of school-going age, because that's when they can start having some autonomy over their own finances and can start saving even in smaller amounts, or should it be started even right from very young age at birth for children of lower income families? Thank you.
Okay, these are both very good questions. First question is about financial education. Is it really necessary, or what? We don't have a complete answer to this, but we do know that hours of financial education in an individual development program is very highly associated with saving success, up to about 10 hours of financial education. After 10 hours of financial education, no effect. No effect at all. So this seems to suggest that some investment in financial education is probably worthwhile, but it's expensive. If you're thinking about social innovations, you have to think about delivering them. That means you have to pay for staff to do it. And so it really matters that you're efficient. So it looks like some financial education is beneficial, but probably not, a whole 5 years worth. Speaking about that, I think we now know enough from behavioral economics and watching people's financial life, that how can I say this? Humans are not very good at this. This is not just low-income people, but most humans are not very good at financial affairs. Most of us just kind of getting by. We think we know we should do something, but we tend not to do it. If we decide we're going to invest in securities, we do it all wrong. We buy high and sell low. This is like that's how the financial sector makes so much money. So we actually the empirical results on this are quite clear. Humans are not good at it. So if that's the case, and we know that people need financial security and some set of financial services, I think the only sensible policy is that you make as much of this automatic as possible, so people aren't in a position to make stupid mistakes. So I guess that's partly a response to your question about education, because I don't think that education is the full answer. I think education can help a little bit, but I think it's like the plumbing. If you don't have the plumbing there, then a lot of people are not going to have clean water. So that's really what I think. Okay, the second question was good. Oh, how young? Good question. I think I would, if possible, start things at birth, because it's very clear that parents begin to shape their own outlook, and we found evidence even by age 4 that that's affecting children. So what you're trying to affect is not just a child, but early childhood development. There's a growing body of research that suggests that early childhood development is the whole ball game. If you don't get to kids before they're 5, then you may not be able to recover if they have real deficits. So I would say start at birth if possible. When can kids themselves engage with this? We started matching savings with, we asked this question ourselves, started matching savings with kids in kindergarten, 5-year-olds. And it's interesting. They like the project. They like to save the money and take them to the bank to make deposits. They're very, very high energy about the project. They know that this saving they think it's for college. So, and they can articulate even at 5, if you have interviews with them. This little kid will say, "Oh, this saving's for my college." If you ask, well, what is college? They'll have no idea. So I don't know, when cognition is really effective. They seem to engage, but then, eventually as they go on, this picture will begin to fill in for them.
Thank you, Professor Sherraden. Thank you, Mr. Nathan, for gracing this occasion. Now, before we go, I think I really need to thank a group of people. The Department of Social Work administrative staff have been behind the scenes, and especially Associate Professor Corinne Goh. She's the one organizing this whole thing behind the scenes doing this. Alright, so thank you everyone. Please proceed to tea. Thank you.